Okay, magandang araw po sa ating lahat. Ngayon po ay ang pag-uusapan natin ay ang limit theorems, isa sa mga foundation lessons sa basic calculus, especially sa mga kumukuha ng calculus dyan, mga STEM students. Ito po ay para sa inyo. Now, ito po ang mga ginagamit natin theorem po paano natin i-solve o paano natin kunin ang limit ng isang function. So, wag na natin patagalin. Let's start. Theorem number 1. That would be the constant theorem. And sabi dyan, the limit of c when x approaches a is equal to c, where c is a constant. No? So, ibig sabihin, kung ano yung constant, siya na yung limit ng function. So, let's have an example. So, the limit of 4 when x approaches 2, napakadali lang. So, that means the limit of 4 when x approaches 2 is the constant or is equal to 4. No? Dali lang. So, tandaan lang natin kung ano yung constant, siya na yung limit. Okay, number 2, example. The limit of 2 when x approaches 0, that means the limit of 2 when approaches 0 is yung constant, and that means is equal to 2. Dali lang po, no? Yung limit natin. So, theorem number 2. Theorem number 2, for any number a, sabi dyan, the limit of x when x approaches a, that is equal to a. So, ibig sabihin, tatandaan lang natin, kung x yan, approaches x din siya, yan yung kung saan siya nag-approach, yan na yung limit ng function. No? So, halimbawa, the limit of x when x approaches to negative 1, when x approaches to negative 1 is equal to what? The negative 1. Tama po kayo, negative 1. So, another example. So, the limit of x when x approaches 0, para s x nag-approach. So, therefore, ano po yung limit natin dyan? Ang limit natin ay, yes, tama po. Tama po kayo. When x approaches 0, then therefore, the limit of this function is equal to 0 also. Okay? Dali lang. Limit number 3, or theorem number 3, limit theorem number 3, or yung constant, tapos multiple rule. So, ibig sabihin, suppose the limit of the function of x when x approaches a is equal to L, then, so, the limit of k, that would be equal to the limit of k times the limit of the function when x approaches c, or therefore, that is equal to simply as k times the limit of the function. Okay? So, para mas maintindihan pa natin, or maintindihan natin maigi, bigay tayo ng halimbawa. So, example number 1, the limit of 3x, kung titingnan nyo, 3x na siya, may constant siya, tapos may multiple pa siya, or minomultiply sa function when x approaches 2. According to that, ilalagay lang po natin yung 3 sa harap. Tapos, imumultiply natin ng limit ng function. So, that means the limit, or that is equal to 3 times the limit of x when x approaches 2, which is, ano siya? Equal siya sa, using theorem number 2 is equal to 2. And therefore, that would be 3 times 2, or therefore, it is equal to 6. Okay? That would be equal to 6. Another example. The limit of 4x when x approaches to 1. So, anong gagawin natin? Ilalagay natin ito sa harap. And kukunin natin yung limit ng variable or yung function. So, that means 4 times the limit of x times, or when x approaches 1 and therefore that is 4 times 1, or that is equal to, okay, you're correct, 4 times 1 is equal to 4. Okay, so malinaw. So next theorem natin is theorem number 4, or the sum or difference rule. So that is plus minus, no? Sum is plus, difference is minus. Suppose the limit of the function of x when x approaches a is equal to L, and the limit of the g of x when x approaches a is equal to m. Therefore, that function, or this function, the limit of this function, the limit of function of x when x approaches a plus or minus the g of x is equal to the limit of the first function time plus or minus the limit of the second function. So, para mas maintindihan natin, bigay tayo ng halimbawa. So, the limit of x plus 3 when x approaches 1. So, yun. Tingnan nyo, plus po yan, no? Take note of that. So, therefore, by applying the limit or the theorem number 4, limit theorem number 4, so, paghihiwalayan lang natin at ipa-plus natin since this is plus. So, the limit of x minus, or the limit of x when x approaches 1 plus, no? Plus yan, the limit of 3 when x approaches 1. So, by applying theorem number 2, sabi natin that is x, or the limit of this function is equal to 1. By applying theorem number 1, so limit of a constant, that would be equal to 3. So 1 plus 3, and therefore that is equal to 4. Okay, next example. So the limit of 2x minus 1 when x approaches to 2. So paghihiwalayin lang natin ito, limit na yan, taas limit nito, so magiging yan. But by applying, kung mapapansin niyo to, multiple multiple rule, constant multiple rule. So ilalagay natin sa harap, that means 2 times the limit of x when x approaches 2. And ito, the limit niyan, the limit of 1 when x approaches 2. So ito, madali lang natin makuha by applying on this and this limit. So, theorem number 2 natin, that is equal to 2. So, times 2, and then the limit minus the limit of this one. So, that means the limit of a constant, so that is 1. So, that means 2 times 2, 4, minus 1 is equal to 3. Okay? So, malinaw po yan. Yan po ang paraan kung paano natin kunin ang limit ng sum and difference rule. Next would be the theorem number 5, or the product rule. So, ano yung sinasabi dito? Suppose the limit of f of x when x approaches 1 is equal to L, and the limit of g of x when x approaches to a is equal to m. Therefore, sabi niya, the limit of the function of x times the g of x when x approaches 1 is equal to the limit of L times the limit of m. Ibig sabihin lang yan, the limit ng unang function, i-multiply mo lang din sa limit ng second function. So, para mas maintindihan pa natin maigi, bigay tayo ng halimbawa. So, halimbawa, so the limit of x times the quantity 2x plus 3 when x approaches to 1. So, kung mapapansin ninyo, ginagamitan na natin ito ng mga pinag-aralan nating mga theorem. Andito na yung constant multiple, andito na yung constant, and then ito yung sum and difference. Then, mayroon ulit na product. Paano nang gagawin natin dito? So, hiwa-hiwalayin lang natin siya, no? Paano ba natin siya hiwalayin? Yan po. Paano natin hiwalayan? So, hiwalayin natin to. So, the limit of x when x approaches 1. Ito, That means the limit of 2x when x approaches 1, and then ito, the limit of 3 when x approaches 1. Pero pwede po rin natin i-apply yung distributive property. So, saka na natin applyan ng sum in difference. You will arrive at the same answer. But sa ngayon, ang gagawin natin ay isusundin muna natin yung theorems na pinag-aaralan natin. So, using theorem number 2, this is equal to 1, di ba? Ito, this is equal to 1. So, but this time, ito, theorem number 3, ilalagay natin sa harap, and then apply theorem number 2, that is equal to 1. So, therefore, itong limit na to, that is 2 times 1. So, ito, theorem number 1, theorem of a constant is equal to 3. So, by simplifying, 2 times 1 is 2, times 1 is 2, plus 3 is, again, 2 times 1 is 2, times 1 is 2, plus 3 is equal to 5. Okay? So, another example. Let's say the limit of x times the quantity 2x minus 1 when x approaches to 2. So, paano natin yung gagawin? So, walang problema. Iwahiwalayin lang natin. Iwahiwalayin natin. Yung una, limit of x when f approaches 2, Then, multiply by limit nung nasa loob. Then, limit of 2x when x approaches 2. And then, itong limit ng constant. So, yan na yung ating magiging statement yan. So, isa-isahin natin. So, applying theorem number 2, that is equal to 2. Tama? Ito. So, ito naman, 2 times the limit of this x. So, ilalagay natin sa harap. Kaya mayroon siyang 2. Ang limit nito, limit of x when x approaches 2 is 2. And then ito, minus, because this is minus. So, limit of a constant is 1. So, by simplifying it further, 2 times 2 times 2 minus 1 is 2 times 4 minus 1, or that means 8 minus 1, and equal to 7. So, yan lang po. Ganyan lang po kasimple. Okay, next theorem. So, kung mayroon tayong addition, mayroon tayong subtraction, mayroon tayong multiplication, mayroon din tayong division, o yung tinatawag na quotient rule natin. Ano yan? Suppose the limit of function of x when x approaches a is equal to L, and the limit of the g of x when x approaches a is equal to m. Ito, no? Di ba? Therefore, the limit of function of x when x approaches a over the limit of g of x when x approaches a is equal also to the limit of L over m. Madaling sabi, dinidivide lang natin or kunin lang natin yung limit ng numerator then over the limit of the denominator. So, paano yan? Example natin. So, again, provided that yung m natin ay hindi equal to 0. Itong denominator. Bakit? Anong mangyayari pag denominator ay 0? Pag denominator po ay 0, ay magiging undefined, di ba? Alam na natin yon. So, pag sinabi natin undefined, wala tayong makukuhang sagot dyan. So, mayroong ibang lesson dyan. Susunod natin yan. Abangan nyo na lang po. But this time, stick muna tayo dito sa theorem or limit theorems. So, examples. So, let's say the limit of x over x plus 2 when x approaches to negative 1. So, quotient, di ba? So, kunin natin yung limit ng numerator. Kunin natin yung limit ng denominator. So, limit of x when x approaches 1 over the limit of x plus 2 when x approaches to 1. So, alam na natin yan. So, ito, by applying some indifference theorem, hiwalay lang natin the limit of x when x approaches 1 plus the limit of 2 when x approaches 1. So, meron na tayo. Ito, theorem, constant theorem. So, that is equal to 1. Ito, the limit of x when limit of x when x approaches 1 is also 1. The limit of a constant when x approaches to 1 is also 2. So, simplifying it further, that is 1 over 3 or 1/3. Okay. Next. Okay po. Theorem number 7 or yung power rule. Ano pong sabi dito? The limit of the function of f of x raised to p when x approaches a, ibig sabihin yung p na yan po ay yung exponent, that would be equal to the limit of the function when x approaches a raised to p or yung exponent. So, let's have an example para mas maintindihan pa natin. Let's say, the limit of x cubed when x approaches to 1, yung exponent yung 3, that would be equal to the limit of x when x approaches 1 raised to the third power. And also, by getting the limit of the function, so theorem number 3, that would be equal to the limit of this function is equal to 1, and using this theorem, kailangan lang natin erase tong exponent, and that is 3, and therefore 1 times 1 times 1, or that means 1 cube, is also equal to 1. So, another example. So, meron na tayo. Halo-halo na. The limit of x squared minus x plus 3 when x approaches 2. So, isa-isahin lang natin, no? So, limit of x squared, yung theorem number 7 natin. Limit of x raised to 2 when x approaches 2 minus the limit of x when x approaches 2 plus, kasi minus ito, dito naman plus, the limit of 3 when x approaches 2. So, ito, that means ang limit nito ay 2, since exponent niya ay 2, ay exponent din natin. Erase din natin sa 2. Ito, the limit of this is 2, since minus, kaya minus natin. Ito, the limit of a constant is 3 plus, kasi plus din ang nandito. So, by evaluating 2 raised to 2 is 4, minus 2 plus 3, and that would be equal to 5. Okay? So, ganyan lang po ang limit of a function. Ito na, last theorem natin. Yung radical or yung root rule natin. Huwag kayong mag-alala, huwag kayong ma-confuse. Radical naman, mas mahirap. Hindi po. So, let's have this. The limit of the square root of x when x approaches a is equal to the square root of the limit of x when x approaches a. Alam niyo itong radical or square root, ibig sabihin lang yan, ang exponent nitong x na to ay 1/2. So, pwede natin yan i-extract or pwede natin yan gawin na the limit of the square root limit of x when x approaches 4, or that means, inire-write ko lang the limit of x raised to 1/2 when x approaches 4. So, pwede nating apply na ito ng power rule. So, sabi natin sa power rule, kunin natin yung limit nito, tapos erase na lang natin doon sa exponent. So, the limit of x when x approaches 4 raised to 1/2. So, ito ang limit nito ay 4 raised to 1/2. So, 4 raised to 1/2, or that means also equal to the square root of 4, which is 2. So, ganun lang po ang pagkuha natin sa mga radicals. Huwag tayong ma-confuse. Pag square root, ibig sabihin yan raised to 1/2. Pag cube root, ibig sabihin yan raised to 1/3. Pag fourth root, ibig sabihin yan raised to 1/4. So, ganyan lang po. So, yan lang po ang mga theorems natin sa limit. So, abangan nyo yung sinasabi ko kaninang pag ang denominator ay naging 0, yan po ang ating susunod na video lessons. Maraming salamat po. I hope may natutunan kayo. Please comment lang po kung meron kayong comment, and kindly like kung nagustuhan nyo or kung may natutunan kayo, at huwag ding kalimutan mag-subscribe. Okay, maraming salamat po hanggang sa ulitin.